The age-old fascination with giants has persisted throughout human history and transcended throughout our entire culture. Tales of these colossal figures have sparked our imagination and curiosity for generations. Some may dismiss the stories as that they were merely legends or fantasies, while other questions whether there is enough evidence leading to the possibility that giants in some form may have once roamed our world. Now, the definition of giant can surely be debated. However, none can dispute the facts that giants, in at least some degree, have been around us even in the last century. Robert Wadlow, the giant of Illinois, 8 feet 11 inches tall, size 37 AA shoe.
In Alton, Illinois, there's a little museum that has a statue of him out front.
A big statue.
And you think, well, I mean, I'm 6 foot tall, and you think, I compared to most people, I'm tall.
Yeah, right.
And then you stand next to that statue, and
you're
like,
not so tall.
Man,
not so tall.
That guy was a giant.
Then, of course, Bill and I both love the next one, Andre the Giant.
The eighth wonder of the world.
Professional wrestler, 520 pounds, 7 foot 4 inches.
Extra teeth?
To
fill his mouth?
Yes. But before them, hundreds, if not thousands, of giant skeleton remains, some over 15 feet high in height, have all been reported and handed over, allegedly, to the Smithsonian Institute. But for those who still scoff and laugh, if you ask, do you believe in giants? Many will laugh. But if you ask a Christian if they believe in the Bible, well, of course they believe in the Bible. But in doing so, there are dozens of stories of giants within those biblical pages. So who should really be laughing now? Join us tonight as we stretch our imaginations and heighten our minds, trying to understand giants of the world.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Proof of giants throughout history. Concept of giants has been part of the human folklore and mythology for millennia, resonating through various cultures and continents, from the Americas to Africa, from ancient Israel to the Norse, and of course, here in America. Both the North and the South have indigenous legends speaking of giant beings, some even overlapping with interpretations, like mastodons that once roamed the land. The Native American tales often include references to a race of giants, which could be considered a cultural memory of these large prehistoric animals. I had touched upon biblical text. I myself am a Christian, so I don't want to get off on the wrong foot here, but the biblical references, such as those found in the book of Genesis, speak of the Nephilim, a race of giants that existed before the flood. Now, these beings have been subject to much interpretation, with some considering them metaphorical, while others believe in their literal existence. David's battle against Goliath is undoubtedly one of the most iconic stories of humans overcoming a giant, at least from the Bible. And we're going to dive into more biblical accounts, or I will, of giants later on in the episode. Goliath of Gath is possibly the most famous giant in history. The story of David and Goliath is commonly used to illustrate lopsided battles. As popularly told, a boy armed only with a shepherd's sling bravely accepts the challenge of a well-equipped superhuman warrior, defeats this giant with a single stone, and becomes the king of Israel. Now, a fictional flavor seems to permeate the typical rendition of this story. David's fight with Goliath is recorded in 1 Samuel 17. Now, this event is treated as real history, not a mythological story. And in fact, the account fits perfectly with other biblical history. Remarkably, David is never depicted as a little shepherd boy. Prior to his meeting of Goliath, David is described as a mighty valiant man and a man of war, and prudent in all matters. and the Lord is with him, as spoken in 1 Samuel 16:18. Goliath's large stature also makes sense. He was likely a son of Anak, a clan of very large people known as the Anakims. When Israel defeated them, none of the Anakim were left in the land of the children of Israel. They remained only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod. That was Joshua 11:22. Goliath's height is even recorded as 6 cubits, and in a span, a cubit generally refers to a length of about 18 inches, and a span is a half a cubit. This places Goliath and presumably his relatives in a large range around 9 to 10 feet tall. Now, Goliath was possibly slightly larger since he was considered the champion warrior of the clan. What explains these giants? Some suggest these people had a disease, an imbalanced growth of hormones, but it is unlikely that a multi-generational clan of people would have had this condition, and all of them, while others believe the children born to the sons of God and the daughters of men, referred to in Genesis 6:4, were indeed giants, with demonic influence conferring these great physical statures and features. Numerous ancient accounts, including the Bible, mention a time when giants did walk on the earth. Ancient civilizations around the world mention in their folklore about giants. I may butcher this, but I'm going to try to pronounce it. Mahabharata has mentioned that Gat of Kacha, who was a giant. Similar stories can be found in the sacred Thai texts of Celion and in Greek mythology, as well as Aztec, as well as Egyptian, Irish, or Basque traditions. Countless newspaper reports dating back more than 100 to 200 years ago actually detailed the discovery of massive bones and what many people believe to have belonged to real giants that walked the earth. Now, with all these stories, these legends, accounts sprinkled across the entire world, can they all be wrong? What are the chances that these various clans, these races of people from all different walks of life, from all different regions of the world, would dream up stories so similar in their findings? Back so long ago, before popular media, platforms, magazines, newspapers, or for many, even the ability to read or write. Yet we have these like stories.
Well, for me, when Eric talked about giants across the world, there was only one giant story that immediately jumped to mind. If we're not going to talk about all the giant human remains that you find scattered across the United States that, allegedly lay hidden in a Smithsonian vault somewhere. And that was the story of the Giant of Kandahar. Now, as I looked into the story of the Giant of Kandahar, which is a region of Afghanistan, I found out that there was more than one giant sighting, according to certain experts, in Afghanistan while American forces were over there.
I remember the one that had I'll call it the YouTube video with the helicopter flying over, and there was like machine guns going off and shooting it and all kinds of stuff.
I don't know that I ever saw that video.
And I thought, wow, this is definitely AI.
Yeah. So, according to some service members deployed in Afghanistan, there were multiple encounters with strange humanoids far taller than your average man. Of course, the most notable, the Giant of Kandahar. Stephen Quayle spoke of the incident, which is allegedly still classified by the U.S. government, on popular radio show Coast to Coast AM.
Good old Coast to Coast, yeah.
Now, this allegedly happened in 2002 in a desert part of Afghanistan. A U.S. Army squad went missing, and a special ops task force from branch unknown, possibly Army Rangers considering that it was a missing squad from the Army, was dispatched to find out what happened to this unit. Now, the soldiers walked along a ragged mountain trail until they arrived at the entrance of a large cave. Now, at the entrance to this cave, there were pieces of broken military equipment and gear scattered about, presumably the gear belonging to the missing unit.
Not a good sign.
So as the task force approached, intending to enter the cave and explore it, find out what's going on, see if they could find their men, they encountered a 12 to 15 foot tall, red-headed giant. Red-headed, I want to remember that. That comes up.
Yes, it does.
With 2 rows of teeth.
Which also comes up a lot.
I mean, heck, if you even want to think about Andre the Giant in that respect. And 6 digits on each hand.
Another repeatable story.
Apparently, the giant was going about a normal activity of cooking food when encountered. When they engaged the giant, it emerged from the caves, just roaring, just full-on attack mode, and attacked the unit, impaling one of them with a giant spear and then turning on the rest of the squad. Now, the soldiers stated it took 30 seconds of sustained gunfire to down the giant, and I believe at least one of the weapons they had on hand was 50 caliber,
Wow.
which that's a big caliber gun.
Yeah.
They said that much firepower concentrated on one target for 1 second would have been extremely destructive, enough to completely obliterate most targets, and let alone the 30 seconds that it took to actually bring the giant down.
Now, I want to interrupt. I love the fact that he was cooking.
Yeah.
A lot of times when you hear the stories of giants, they're just like ripping apart a deer or a horse or a person and eating the raw flesh. So this one definitely showed some intelligence and
routinely these giant encounters, they were going about pretty mundane tasks.
Yeah.
So now they said the giant wore canvas or animal hide covers to protect its feet, something like moccasins, and they said it smelt like dead bodies. Now, after downing the creature and calling back, the creature's body was airlifted back to the squad's base by helicopter via a big net slung underneath. I think they said it was a Chinook helicopter, which is those big twin-rotor cargo transport helicopters.
I'm envisioning Jurassic World when they were hunting down the dinosaurs and hauling them out in helicopters like that.
After it was taken to the base, it was loaded onto another aircraft and taken away, never to be seen again. Now, upon returning to the States, these soldiers were made to sign NDAs to stop them from talking about their encounter. The witness that eventually related the story stated he broke his silence because, quote, people have the right to know what's happening on our planet. Now, of course, when contacted, the Pentagon had no record of this encounter.
Of course not.
But the giant at Kandahar was not the only giant seen in Afghanistan, like I said earlier. Another story is that of the giant of Kunar. Now, this giant was encountered by an infantry team leader between 2008 and 2009 while looking out over a village nestled in a valley one night. Now, he was looking, surveying the scene using a thermal scope when he came across what he called a very large heat signature. Now, at first, he assumed it was a group of Taliban fighters huddled together to stay warm in the cold desert night. And then the heat signature stood up as one single entity. The soldier said the trees in the area were between 10 and 12 feet tall, and that this figure was at least as tall, if not taller, than the trees around it. It walked away with a slow and relaxed but purposeful pace before disappearing along a nearby mountain spur. Another story was told by an anonymous Air Force drone pilot who was operating in the northern part of Afghanistan during the war. One day he spotted 3 giants, he said each roughly 12 feet tall, as indicated by the ruler on his drone's camera. He observed the figures for 10 minutes, give or take, as they went about normal activities like tending their fire, performing other chores.
10 minutes?
Yeah. The pilot said the nearby goats looked like cats in comparison to the giants. Another airman recalled a sighting recorded northeast of the Korangal Valley while scanning and analyzing some real-time video feeds. Now, he was watching some people around a fire to see if he could pick out any weapons, decide whether they were a threat or not. After about 20 minutes, what he initially thought was 2 people huddled together under a blanket stood up. And the remaining people looked like children in comparison to this figure.
So the giant was sitting there with, we'll say, average-sized humans.
Average people, yeah. And again, just going about normal, everyday things. They didn't think anything strange about the giant being there, obviously.
Afghanistan seems to kind of have a little colony going on.
Well, to be fair, I did not tackle this from the same angle you did, but if you want to go back to biblical times and biblical stories, it's kind of that region of the world.
Well, I'm going to bring us back around a little bit to America, and I've got several different alleged giant skeletal remains.
Eric, we already did Giants in America.
I know, and it was one of my favorite episodes. It was like our third?
Second.
Bill has never been a big fan of
Hopkinsville Giants.
Hopkinsville Giants.
The Hopkinsville Goblins. And then Giants in America.
Yeah. So it was time that we did kind of a refresh, but I also tried not to do the same stories.
Well, a lot of ours came from like Missouri and Illinois for the most part.
And I do touch upon a couple. One, though, first one, we're going to call the Iowa Mound Skeletons. Now, this was in 1897. An unspecified newspaper reported unusual finds of an Indian mound found in Iowa. Now, for those of you who may not be understanding what an Indian mound is, we have a lot of those here in Missouri, up around the Illinois border. They're essentially, they just look like a giant hill.
Well, if you didn't know what you were looking at.
If you didn't know what you were looking at.
You were, Cahokia Mounds specifically is not too far from St. Louis.
And the thought is that there was some type of a structure, possibly
settlement.
like a pyramid, a settlement or something. And then just over time, the dirt and stuff has kind of, covered it over. Nature has reclaimed it. Now it just looks like a mound. But we go back to 1897. Now, archaeologists allegedly dug up a skeleton, 229 centimeters. Now, that's about 7 foot 6 inches in height there. Again, we're going to get into the definition of a giant. And to me, I'm 6'2". My wife is 5'2".
So are you saying in comparison you're a giant?
I do not want to be considered a giant. So to
Sounds
me,
like you got a giant ego.
I do have a giant ego. Ask anybody. Ask my wife especially. But to me, I think you've got to be 7 foot, 7 footish to be considered a giant in my book.
Now, see, as a fan of professional wrestling, going back to Andre, I never considered Andre a giant.
That was his name.
No, but that's his character. The Undertaker's not an Undertaker either, Eric.
What?
Yeah. I like the absolute look of shock for a moment. I was like, surely you didn't know.
Say it isn't so.
But again, you have wrestlers and basketball players and such that are routinely 7 foot tall. As a matter of fact,
Yes.
in the last Alien movie, there's a guy who was a Hungarian basketball player. He's 7'7", real oddly shaped, proportioned human being. But I figure if you're human, and we know you're human, whatever your height is, that's human height. Now, those are the extremes. But I wouldn't say Robert Wadlow was a giant per se, because when I'm thinking giant, I'm thinking like folklore and mythology. Robert Wadlow was a human being.
You're thinking like 12, 15 foot.
Robert Wadlow was a
20 foot
human
tall.
being with a physiological disorder.
I got you.
So, and
that, folks, is why this works
I think
in a
it's
weird,
a matter of
twisted
perspective.
way, because Bill has one inkling of what he is thinking, and I often have a different one.
And
We're not saying right, wrong, whatever.
I'll agree, 7-8 foot tall is freakishly tall, but those people are still
We can't use that word.
people.
We can't use freakish.
Freakish?
That's, yeah.
Well, what would be an appropriate replacement word?
Like so many words in today's society, there may not be one anymore. You can't use that.
Abnormally tall.
Okay, we'll go with abnormally tall. Okay. Yeah, they're seriously, again, not meaning to offend anybody.
Yeah, it's not meant in offense.
Circus freaks was a thing of the past. And I'm going from, I sell on eBay. I had a postcard from that era, and it was taken down because I used verbatim the text that was on that postcard, which said circus freaks.
So people who are sideshow performers
Yes.
now,
Yes.
do they use that word?
No. Apparently, no. Now, I don't know any to ask. So,
Well, I don't either. But it's one of those things like certain words are offensive if used offensively.
but often the people that complain about those words aren't those people. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like circus performers, I thought that was a word they used for themselves.
Well, circus performer to me is the acrobats and,
Well, the people
clowns
who
and-
were part of the sideshow.
yeah.
Huh.
Yeah,
And
that's the
eBay
thing.
took you down.
eBay took it down.
Wow.
Welcome to the world we live in,
Hey,
folks.
here's the deal. I'm all for political correctness when it means not offending people. But if that was a word they used for themselves, I don't know. Okay, aside. My wife and daughter wanted to buy some Harry Potter earrings.
Nice choice.
Well, with some of the stuff J.K. Rowling's been involved in.
Oh, here we go. Okay, yes.
We kind of, okay, I don't support J.K. Rowling and her beliefs. I'm very much let people be people kind of guy.
True.
If you're not familiar with the thing, you can look it up. You're free to disagree with me if you want. We're not here to tell people what to think. That's not what we're doing.
Yep.
And my wife said, "Can we buy these?" And they were cheap. They're like $5 or whatever. I don't monitor my wife's purchases. So I was like, "Why are you asking?" Well, it's J.K. Rowling, it's Harry, and I'm like, "Oh, hey,
See, I hadn't even thought about it when you mentioned it.
I am a huge fan of it." I told my wife this. I said, "Hey, I love H.P. Lovecraft's writings. H.P. Lovecraft was a horrible racist.
Yes.
Doesn't mean I support the racism,
Right.
but I like
right,
the stories."
Right.
I said, "I'm all for I'm all for the Harry Potter stories. I don't have to support her as an individual." I mean, Stephen King. I love Stephen King's writings. Every now and then, Stephen King has a political take that I'm not super keen on. Doesn't mean I'm not going to like his writings.
No.
I just don't agree with the man.
Well, we don't always have to agree, but that doesn't mean that we can't.
I think the phrase is
still not be logical.
You can appreciate the art without supporting the artist. So
Amen.
That's what I'm saying.
Amen. All right.
But anyway.
We strayed a little. Apologies. Bringing it back, though. This particular skeleton was 7 foot 6 inches in height there. Now, in another mound of the same state in Iowa, archaeologists stumbled across a larger chamber containing as many as 11 skeletons. Now, these were arranged in an unusual way as a circle, and in the center of that circle was a huge shell. Now, all the skeletons were
What, when you say shell?
like, not the word seashell because we're in Iowa.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes, like a river mussel.
Okay,
a shell.
like a shell though.
Yeah.
Like not
a bullet or anything like.
No, well,
like,
I wasn't sure what you meant when you said shell.
Okay,
So I
fair
wanted
enough.
clarification.
Fair question. When the archaeologists began to work there, they noticed that a lot of these skeletons were well over 2 meters. They had also encountered an unusual substance similar to what would be called a copper powder. Now, this seems very uncommon among the Native American peoples and various tribal clans across America. Many of the Native American peoples do tell stories that, there were giants. It's part of their tradition. It's like in almost every central, at least American Native Indian people.
My headline involves marauding giants that came from across the sea. So
There you go. So often if you were talking to a Native American, they wouldn't even be having this
they took
debate.
it for granted.
Yeah,
it was a conversation.
Absolutely, they existed.
It was no different than the spirits and Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Like these things were real to them. They didn't question it.
I believe it was the Osagians. They had like a pact, an agreement with the race of giants, where certain areas were designated as the giants areas, and certain areas were given to the Native Americans by the giant race to be able to hunt as well.
Didn't we talk about this?
Yeah.
With was it when Lauren was on the show? Did he not? Maybe I know we've talked about something.
I know
like
we've
this.
talked about it on different. I think multiple
maybe more
podcasts.
than once. Yeah.
Now I'm going to bring us back to an Ozarks giant. To Bill's point. 1933, a Missouri State newspaper reports of a find of a small resort town in the Ozarks. Now, I did track this down. It was in Steelville, Missouri. That's kind of the upper north region between like St. James and Potosi. But a local boy, Billy Hartman, had crawled into Puckett Cave by Merrimack River in search of ancient Indian arrowheads and spears that were allegedly seen there. Now, he found more than he bargained for. He found a depression in the cave where human bones lay. Now, the boy reported them to the adults, and when they collected the samples, complete as much as they could, of the bones, it turned out, when they laid it out, it was over 8 feet in length. After being publicly displayed in town for a period of time and photographed for several local newspapers, it eventually was forwarded to the Smithsonian Institute, who had expressed interest, especially in that time, in any remnants or remains of giants in America. Now later, allegedly, that giant, among many others that was sent in, appear to have been lost.
I like the idea that somewhere there's a Smithsonian vault that's like that scene at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And you could just walk through there and it'd be like giant skeletons and like UFO remains.
There was
and
another
stuff.
TV series, I think it was Warehouse 13, that was kind of a similar deal.
There was a website in the early days of the internet that was hosted by Steve Jackson Games, I think. And it was an ever-evolving document of, okay, if the warehouse at the end of Indiana Jones existed, what would it contain? And it was just people would just add a line like, there's a box containing Excalibur. There's the remains of giants that have been found around the world, things like that.
Right.
I like the idea that exists. I'm sure it doesn't, but it's fascinating.
You can believe what you want. I am in the belief that it does not any longer exist. I think it was a matter of get rid of it. I wish I could say eventually sometime the warehouse might be open.
If the Smithsonian had those remains, would they get rid of it though? What would be the motivation to do that?
That is the controversy, because at that time in particular, we're talking, turn of the century.
Well, when I think about it, I think about like Old West times and stuff, but you're right. Early 1890s,
1900s, all the way through like
the end of the Old
1920s. keep in mind, we still firmly believed in Darwinism. I mean, we literally came up through monkeys and gorillas and all this. And I think for the most part,
you say that. And okay, we're going to sit here across the table and have a disagreement.
We're going to debate.
Because evolution is science, and we
Yes.
can prove science. But anyway, no, we're not here to argue that part. I would say at that point in time, you still had a big chunk of people that were not on board with Darwin and his beliefs.
But
Wouldn't
were the people
giants prove?
Exactly. And so the people that were pulling the strings were trying to make sure that their beliefs were supported, if that makes sense.
Wouldn't there have been a lot of Christian people who, in positions of power?
I don't know.
Again, what would be the motivation to hide it? I'm not understanding that. In my brain,
Okay, here's my take.
I don't trust the government. Let's preface that.
I think we
So
can
I
both
can
agree on that.
understand why they would want to hide things, but
I think basically to the point of destroying it. Therefore, nobody else can find this again, because this goes against what we have been taught in society and schools. And I'm going to say at that time, many leading scientists, mainstream media, however you want to put it.
I don't know though. I think you're thinking of it almost in a time frame a little further up, because I would say the end of the 18, beginning of the 19. I still think a lot of people would have been more on board with the religious side of things.
Well, see, I envision it more of and I hate to mix this in, but like when Roswell occurred, we're talking 1940s.
Yeah.
I think that really started to be the questioning point in America. And I could be wrong. This is just my take.
I think we started questioning the government really after World War II.
Yeah, 1940s. 1945,
Yeah,
46.
sometime during World War II, especially with the atomic bomb stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was a program I don't think anybody knew existed other than the people involved until it happened.
Right.
So obviously we knew at that point our government was lying to us about some things.
And I think, we may have some people out there listening. I'd say they've probably turned us off by now if they don't aren't at least interested in some of this debate stuff. But today we have seen things in the last 5 years that the government themselves have relayed. I'm going to go to the Tic Tac videos, the UFOs and all that.
That's what I was thinking when you started that.
And it's like, oh no, if you asked back then, oh no, absolutely. Yeah. There's no, that's what we mean by the government is lying. It depends on how deep you want to go down the rabbit hole, how thick your tinfoil hat is. Maybe mine's a little thicker than Bill's, but I don't know. To me, it was about the 1940s, World War II-ish, that I believe we really started kind of questioning. My point is, on the first episode that we did, which was episode 2, 3 on the Giants, this being our second episode on Giants, there was countless newspaper accounts.
Yeah.
Some with pictures. Now, could those have been faked? Absolutely.
Well, you and I both had...
Do we know there was fakes? Absolutely.
You and I both had multiple accounts from this region reported in newspapers and multiple accounts of, each incident having multiple accounts, with the exception of one, which was the one that I had about the underground city. Which
that was a very interesting one.
Cool story, but everybody agrees it was a hoax.
Yeah.
I guess I don't understand the motivation to not embrace it.
Okay.
I can understand where you're coming from with the science versus religion debate, but man, it just seems like it would be a fascinating thing. And
oh, absolutely.
The impact it would have would be much less significant than if the government revealed tomorrow that aliens existed.
But would it?
It would confirm a lot of things that a lot of people already believe.
Yes.
And not in the way that people believe in UFOs as a conspiracy, but in the fact that it was you have the Bible that says these things existed. So
yes,
I guess you and I just see that
the mass hysteria, panic. I guess
you wouldn't have that. I don't think you'd have that.
Well, are you going to let your kids out in the backyard to play if a giant body was 15 foot discovered within 5 miles of your place?
Why would it matter? Because we're obviously not seeing giants now, which means they're not still around.
Okay,
they were around.
I hear that point. I guess my point is, and I will use the word facts very loosely, but assuming these newspaper clippings, let's say half of them were legit. I'm willing to meet here. We know there were hoaxes, just the same as there is in any line. But there were some of those original articles that said there was signed affidavits of when they loaded the bones, when the Smithsonian's accepted the bones.
Well, then you have
that they did accept.
Yeah, and then you have the Smithsonian saying they never got them.
Yeah, so where did they go? I love the concept that the Indiana Jones warehouse or the warehouse starts, and you flip on a light and it just, just keeps going endlessly. I hope maybe sometime, as with Tic Tac videos and, all this, maybe some of this will come out. But my point is, not all of that stuff was documented. So we have to go on hearsay, and hearsay is hearsay. But I'm talking about the ones that were documented, affidavits that we're handing the bones over. We have accepted the bones. I even quoted in the first Giant episode, the Smithsonian published, at least at that time, I think it was a monthly or maybe bi-monthly newsletter. And one of the people that was in there reported, and there was a story that they did in fact receive these. They did photograph them, included photographs of the giant bones spread out. And then today, oh no, we never got those.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, I believe they hid it because there's too many. It's like with the UFO thing. If even 1% of these stories is true, that casts everything into doubt.
Yes.
And why, I don't understand why this, okay, I guess maybe being the Smithsonian and being a museum and being motivated
all
by
about science
and whatnot, which you say it like it's a dirty word. Science is real.
Okay, Bill. Science is very real. I'm not debating that. I've been in business way too long to know that people who donate money to support, let's say, the Smithsonian, if you, pardon my French, piss those people off, maybe rub them against the grain, they no longer contribute. Therefore, now your job's in jeopardy. But, I mean, it's wrong, but that's the truth of the matter. The people with the money control the narrative, and the people who work for the people with the money have to keep the people with the money happy.
People with money on both sides, though.
Yes, and maybe we're starting to see the tip of the balance of a lot of things. I don't know. It'll be fun to hang around and watch, won't it?
Well, when they reveal aliens this year, that'll be.
Yeah,
I saw a deal about that the other day. But anyway.
Anyhow, boy, we're getting into a lot of different things. But hey, a lot of people say they like that, so we're doing this for you.
Some people don't either.
Some people don't.
Some people like we stay on topic and don't deviate.
Yes,
and I apologize that we did.
Yes,
but it was.
This apparently is not one of those episodes. Then we jump to a giant in San Francisco. October 7th, 1895, the World newspaper reported on a discovery of a giant Indian mummy, as it was described, 274 centimeters. That's almost 9 feet tall, so we're kind of getting into Bill's spectrum here of what he would call a giant, near San Diego, California. Now, again, it calls it the mummy, was most likely a female because it was clutching the remains of a child to its breast. And I did a little bit of a try.
It's just a regular person.
Maybe. Yeah. This is my baby doll, my teddy bear. I tried to dig a little bit deeper in this, and I did find, I think, why they're calling it a mummy, because it was in wrappings, not a traditional like mummy wrapping, but like cloth had been applied around it.
Well, depending, especially desert climates, bodies can be preserved pretty well. So.
And then I'll have one more before I hand it over to Bill, and we can bounce back. But I loved this one. This just makes a good headline. Egyptian giant gives the middle finger. I'm like, okay, I got to read this. Other than these skeletal remains, some of these that I've mentioned, a giant finger was also found. A finger of what is believed to have belonged to a creature of immense height was found in Egypt about 50 years ago. So only 50 years ago. Now, the finger is believed to be authentic and is 28 centimeters. Now, that's just barely shy of a foot long.
That's a big
foot
finger.
Long single finger, which
middle
they believe
finger.
is a middle finger. So that's a big finger. Some reports suggest that this being, obviously that it would have belonged to, would have been at least 5 meters. Now, putting that in comparison, that's 16 feet in length if it is in relationship to the size of said finger. So maybe the giants are giving us all the big finger from wherever they're at now.
Well, I found stories of the Patagons, which I had never heard of before. And this is a race of giant humanoids that were believed to be living in Patagonia.
This goes back to the Magellan time frame, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
They were said to have been at least twice the height of an average person, with some stories going as high as 13, 15 feet tall, maybe even more. The first story of Patagons came from Ferdinand Magellan and his crew, who claimed to have seen them while exploring the coast of South America in the 1520s. Antonio Pagafetta wrote in his account about their encounter, quote, "One day we suddenly saw a naked man of giant stature on the shore of the port, dancing, singing, and throwing dust on his head. The captain general sent one of our men to the giant so that he might perform the same actions as a sign of peace. Having done that, the man led the giant to an islet where the captain general was waiting. When the giant was in the captain general's and our presence, he marveled greatly and made signs with one finger raised upward," not the middle finger,
Give it the finger again.
"believing that we had come from the sky. He was so tall that we reached only to his waist, and he was well proportioned."
That's a big dude.
Now Magellan, being the intrepid and obviously highly moral person that he was, decided to kidnap two of the younger giants as hostages to bring back to Spain as proof that he had encountered said giants.
No wonder they're giving us the finger.
Yeah. Well, to capture them, Magellan came up with a cunning plan. He showed the giants all manner of metal goods, mirrors and scissors and bells and things, and just kept handing them to them so they would marvel at these awesome things that they'd never seen before. And then when their hands were full, he pulled out handcuffs and leg chains and went to hand like he was going to hand them to them, but their hands were already full with these other things. And he's like, "Well, don't worry." And he put them on their wrists and on their
Quite the little
ankles.
trickster.
Yeah. Another quote from the expedition, "Whereat these giants took great pleasure in seeing these fetters and did not know where they had to be put, and they were grieved that they could not take them in their hands." So again, they were upset that they couldn't carry them, and so, they locked them up. Now, unfortunately, these giants got sick and died on the way back to Spain.
Imagine that.
And we can only assume that they dumped the bodies overboard for some reason, but those bodies never made it back. In 1579, Francis Drake's ship's chaplain, that's a lot of S's,
That's a tongue twister.
Francis Fletcher, wrote about meeting Patagonians that were 7.5 feet tall. In 1628, the first details of this encounter were recorded in the publication The World Encompassed. Quote, "Magellan was not altogether deceived in naming them giants, for they generally differ from the common sort of men, both in stature, bigness, and strength of body, as also in the hideousness of their voice. But yet they are nothing so monstrous or giant-like as they were reported. 7.5 feet, describing the full height, if not somewhat more, of the highest of them. But this is certain, that the Spanish cruelties there used," referring of course to Magellan's hostage-taking, "have made them more monstrous in mind and manners than they are in body, and more inhospitable to deal with any strangers that shall come thereafter." So Magellan's actions angered these folks and made them much less hospitable after that.
I can't imagine why.
And again, here, he's saying that they were at least 7.5 feet tall. So we're in the range of where I would say they were still people, but again, still very, very, very tall.
Andre the Giant aspects.
Yeah, well, especially when you think about people in that time frame or in that part of the world. In 1853, Captain Benjamin Franklin Bourne wrote an account of the Patagons, where he claimed to have been kidnapped by them while searching for gold. In his account, the giants spoke broken Spanish. They were very large and muscular, afraid of the water, and lacking in what he called good morals. Quote, "They are taller than any other race I have ever seen. Their average height is nearly 6.5 feet. So again, tall, but not monstrously tall.
Again, for the region,
Absolutely.
That's exceptionally tall.
He also claimed that these giants had superhuman strength. In the 1590s, Anthony Knivet, an English sailor who was captured by the Portuguese, claimed to have seen the dead bodies of 12-foot-tall giants in Patagonia. And also in the 1950s, Williams Adams, an Englishman aboard a Netherlanders ship, reported a violent encounter between the crew and an unnaturally tall natives of the region. Dutch sailors reported seeing giants in Patagonia in 1598 and 1599, and in 1615, Dutch explorers found graves containing human bones on the shores of Patagonia, which belonged to giants 10 to 11 feet tall. In 1766, there was rumor that upon their return to Great Britain, the crew of the HMS Dolphin, captained by Commodore John Byron, had seen a tribe of 9-foot-tall natives in Patagonia. However, a later account of their voyage came out in 1773 and recorded the Patagonians as being 6.5 feet tall, saying, quote, "If I may judge of his height by the proportion of his stature to mine own, it could not be much less than 7 feet. Still tall by 18th century standards, but definitely not supernaturally tall giants."
I had another account over in that region. I was just making sure that you didn't have it before I put it in here. I found a description of a giant that they met also, like I said, in that region that I thought was strange and peculiar. It says his face was large and painted red all over, while about his eyes he was painted yellow.
I saw that. I didn't write it down, though.
It's strange. He had 2 hearts painted on the middle of his cheeks. His scanty hair was painted white. He was dressed in the skins of animals, skillfully sewn together. And then he goes on to say that animal has a head and an ears as large as those of a mule, and a neck and a body like that of a camel. I'm trying to picture this. The legs of a deer, and has the tail of a horse, like which it neighs, and that land has very many of them. It says his feet were shod with the same kind of skins, which covered his feet in the manner of shoes. You had mentioned that in one of your stories. In his hands, he carried a short, heavy bow with a cord somewhat thicker than that of a lute. So, we're talking 1.5 inches, 2 inch, and made from the intestines of presumably the same animal, and a bundle of rather short cane arrows, feathered much like ours, and with points of white and black flint stones in the manner of Turkish arrows instead of iron. Now, those points were fashioned by means of another stone, meaning, almost like tribal Native American, stone chipping on another stone. But I thought, wow, that's a very detailed, interesting description that I had never heard. Well, Bill, have you ever heard of the Book of Giants?
No. Unless you're talking about the one for Dungeons and Dragons.
I am not talking about that one. Well, this particular one was discovered more than a half a decade ago, and it's the so-called Book of Giants. It's a considerable one, most fascinating, yet controversial of some of the discoveries that's ever been made on Earth. Now, it was found together with thousands of ancient scrolls. The Book of Giants describes the demise of the ancient Nephilim. The ancient manuscript speaks of these creatures that inhabited our planet in the distant past and how they were destroyed. The Book of Giants was a work apparently composed by a Syriac, an Eastern dialect of Aramaic. The book was entirely lost until the 20th century, although a few scant references of it survived in the Latin, Greek, and Arabic, indicating that it involved battles of the ancient giants. That's what basically caused them to even recognize what this was, because it had been mentioned in some of these other parts of the nation, parts of the world. Then about a century ago, many highly fragmentary works that were written in Central Asian languages were recovered archaeologically at Tufan in China, and much of the finds remains unpublished even at present. This goes back to what we were kind of got off on. The government is not wanting to share the information. Therefore, a lot of it has not been made public. Only a few pages here and there that's leaked out. Now, it's interesting because the Dead Sea Scrolls contain fragments of mentions of the Book of Giants as well.
Well, and my understanding is there's also some heretical stuff about, the early life of Jesus and whatnot, and that's been discovered. And so in some of those accounts, I could understand why the church wouldn't want those things getting out.
Kind of goes back to, some might ask, well, what's the big deal? Well, we deserve to know. But again, the powers that be may not always want us to know. The powers that be can be a lot of different places.
I can understand the government wanting to keep secrets. The church keeping secrets seems...
That seems even more...
aren't you not supposed to bear false witness? Or, that's...
Yeah. Then we have the Epic of Gilgamesh. What is claimed as the oldest surviving epic story in the world, the Epic of Gilgamesh, also includes references to, you guessed it, giants. Gilgamesh and Erekudu go together to fight the evil Humbala at the Cedar Mountains. Now, Mount Hermon, and I am butchering these, I apologize, Bequa Valley of Lebanon. The evil giant's face, it says, was like a lion. Its roar, like with a flood, had a mouth of flames that breathes as it burns trees, and teeth like dragons. And in the end of the battle, they cut his head off. Now, that's unlike any other giant we've talked about. That sounds like a fire breather. Essentially. That's
some fantasy. That's sounding giant.
Dungeons and Dragons kind of stuff. Now, the list just goes on and on. Here's another document reference as far as like biblical stuff. I told you I would bring you some more biblical stuff. In Herodotus, Book 1, Chapter 68, it describes how the Spartans uncovered Tiga, the body of Orestes, which was 7 cubits long. That's about 10 foot. In his book, Compassion of Romulus with Theseus. Plutarch describes how the Athenians uncovered the body of Theseus, which was of more than ordinary size, again, 10 foot, way over ordinary size. The kneecaps of Ajax were recorded exactly at the size of a disc of the boys of the Pantheon. The discus of the boys, that makes no sense. I think they're trying to say the diameter of the Pantheon.
A discus.
A discus that they would throw.
Yeah.
But it says a boy's. I'm not sure.
I think it's just the way they describe it.
The kneecaps of Ajax were exactly the size of a discus, like used in Roman and in the Pantheon games. A boy's discus was about 12 centimeters in diameter, while a normal adult patella is about 5 centimeters, suggesting this giant, this Ajax, may have been around 14 feet tall. There was another giant, Pliny, Pliny. The Arabian giant, mentioned by the name of Garbia, was 9 feet 9 inches. This is an Arabian giant that is mentioned by Pliny, who says that he was the tallest man seen in the days of Claudius. We have another. Andricus II was 10 feet high. He was the grandson of Alexius Comnenus. Then we have, these words are horrible, I apologize. Elusra was 7 cubits, nearly 10.5 feet tall. And Vitellius sent this giant to Rome, and he mentioned by Joseph that he was 10 foot and 2 inches. So again, we're in the 10 foot, 10 and a half pushing range. That's a pretty good size person. But honestly, the Bible gives us just countless accounts of reminiscence of stories of giants within its pages. And it is somewhat ironic that many scoff and laugh when you dare ask if they believe in giants. But again, if you ask a Christian if they believe in the Bible, obviously it's, of course we do. So in doing so, unless you want to pick and choose what is true and what is not true, you kind of have,
as so many people do these days, you kind of have to open your mind up. Real quickly, Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bore children. The same became mighty men, which were of old men of renown. 1 Chronicles 26. And yet again there was a war at Gath. There was a man of great stature, whose fingers and toes were 24, 6 on each hand, referring to the fingers on the hand again, and 6 toes on each foot. And he also was the son of a giant. 1 Chronicles 20, verses 8. There were born unto the giant of Garth, and they fell by the hand of David, and in the hands of his servants. Deuteronomy 1:28. Whither shall we go up? Or brethren have discouraged our hearts, saying, These people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and walled up to heaven. And moreover, we have seen the sons of Anakims there. And again, Anakims refers to a giant race. Goes on, Deuteronomy 2:20, giants dwelt there within an old time, and the Ammonites called them Zamanzuns. Deuteronomy 3:11, for only the Og king of Bashan remained the remnant of the giants. Behold, his bedstead and his bedstead of iron, it is not of Rabbath of the children of Ammon. 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of, or the width. After the cubit of a man, that would be 13 foot 6 inches. Deuteronomy 3:13, and the rest of Gilead and the Bashan, being the kingdom of Og, gave up unto the tribe of Manasseh the reigns of Argob, and with Bashan, which was called the land of giants. It goes on and on and on, and not just in our Bible, but mentions in the Dead Sea Scroll, mentions in other religious documentations from across the world. Well, I fear if I don't stop you now,
I will babble on forever.
Could be a 2-hour episode. So I think it may be time for headlines.
All right.
Well, far be it from me to not try to tie this into giants. After all, that is what we try to do.
Try.
From the New York Post by Snezhana Farbarov, dated April 4th, 2024. Scientists still baffled from giant human skeletons up to 10 feet tall, decades after initial discovery. A series of mysterious giant skeletons up to 10 feet tall were reportedly discovered in and around Nevada caves in the last century. Dubbed the Giants of Lovelock, they are still baffling scientists decades later. Now, claims about supersized humans who roam the area around Lovelock, a remote town 90 miles northeast of Reno, thousands of years ago are rooted in Native American lore, which tells of fierce, red-headed, pale-skinned giants who arrived from Central America by boat and attacked local tribes. After years of war, the foreign invaders were chased into a cave and slaughtered en masse, according to stories passed down by the indigenous Paiute people. Now, experts believe the tale of the giant warrior's violent extermination is likely a legend, but reports of discoveries made in the area of Lovelock decades ago have continued to raise many unanswered questions. The first foray into the Lovelock Cave was made in 1911 when a pair of miners searching for guano allegedly unearthed 60 human skeletons, including some measuring between 7 and 8 feet tall. The extraordinary find was mentioned in a 1935 biography of mining engineer John T. Reed, but no evidence proving the existence of the gargantuan remains ever materialized. However, 2 subsequent excavations that were carried out in 1912 and 1924 brought to light thousands of ancient artifacts, among them a well-worn sandal measuring an astonishing 15 inches in length.
It's a big foot.
That is the equivalent of a modern-day size 29 shoe. If you want to put that in perspective, Shaq, who is 7'1", wears size 22.
Wow. Okay.
So radiocarbon dating later placed human bone fragments and plant material found in the cave to between 2030 and 1218 BC, so quite a ways back. Another surprising discovery made inside the Lovelock Cave was a handprint embedded in the rock face that measured twice the size of the average human palm. Some years later, an article published in the Nevada Review Minor in 1931 announced the discovery of 2 mummified skeletons in a dry lake bed outside Lovelock. The remains reportedly measured at 8.5 and 10 feet and were described as having red hair. Although some experts believe the red tint of their hair could have been caused by exposure to the environment, the appearance of the skeletons match with the Paiute tribe's stories. And of course, these stories are about a group of giant red-headed barbarians known as the Sitka. And legend has it that the Sitka came to Nevada from a distant land some 3,000 years ago after crossing the ocean in boats made from the bulrush plant. The fierce newcomers were said to have attacked the local inhabitants, unleashing a bloody years-long conflict. Finally, the various tribes in the area joined forces to hunt down and exterminate the barbarians. According to the Paiute stories, the last of the red-haired giants were said to have sought refuge in the Lovelock Cave, but the shelter ended up being their tomb after the natives fired at them with arrows and started a fire at the mouth of the cavern. The story goes that all the giants were slaughtered in that attack, and the tale of the towering red-haired barbarians echoes a legend that Spanish conquistador Pedro Cieza de Leon recorded in the late 16th century, retelling an ancient Peruvian tale about a race of giants who, quote, came by sea in rafts of reeds after the manner of large boats. Some of the men were so tall that from the knee down they were as big as the length of an ordinary fair-sized man.
Wow. Interesting. Well, my headline is, who is the tallest person alive in the world today? And USA Today posted this article February 26th of 2024. The current record holder for the tallest living man is Sultan Koshan of Turkey. He gained the title of the tallest living man back in 2009, according to the Guinness World Book of Records. Now, at the time, Koshan stood 8 foot 1 inches tall. He was the first man in more than 20 years to be measured at over 8 feet tall by the Guinness World Book of Records. Now, 2 years later, Koshan was remeasured again and found that he had grown slightly from 8 foot 1 now to 8 foot 2.8 inches. I like the point that he's that tall, but they've got it, not 2 inches, 2.8 inches.
It's like little kids measuring their age. I'm 5.5.
I'm 5.5. Well, I'm 2.8 inches.
Well, if you're going to be the tallest guy, you might as well.
I guess you better get every little bit.
Be as accurate
there's
as possible.
some other guy out there that's 8 foot that's challenging.
He's 8 foot 2.7 is like, nope, I got you.
I'm taller. I got you, man. Well, Koshan's unique height was caused by a pituitary gland, basically called gigantism, the condition that results from too much growth hormone being secreted by the gland. And in 2010, Koshan underwent surgery to stop further growth. according to the Guinness World Book of Records as it reports. Now, Koshin also holds the record for the largest hands on a living man. Now, imagine this. His hands measure 11.25 inches from the wrist to the tip of his middle finger. So
Man.
almost a foot. Just shy of
His
a foot.
hands are almost a foot.
Almost a foot. Now, you might say, well, why did he have this surgery? Because, as we have found out with...
Well, it has health
issues.
issues.
With the giant of Alton, Illinois, even with Andre.
Yeah, Andre died young because of that.
The body today is not designed to withhold that type of weight, that type of structure. It puts your
The
heart,
knees.
your lungs, your joints, your knees through so much stress. I believe the Alton giant died by the time he was 20 or 22.
And to be fair, when you get that tall, even a trip, if you fall and hit your head, that's high enough that it could kill you.
Yeah. So apparently the surgery has went well for him. We do not expect for him to grow anymore, but he is a whopping 8 foot, 2.8 inches tall with hands the size of a foot.
Question time, Eric. I got a doozy.
Inquiring minds
Very
want to know.
pointed.
Uh-oh, he's going to get back with me for all my wild questions to him.
Why do giants fascinate you so dang much? What is the deal? I just...
Okay, that's a fair question.
Because this will be the first time that we've done a second episode on an older topic.
Yeah. it is, I
So
think.
obviously it's something that fascinates you.
Giants are something of very much interest to me, and I've asked myself that question, but I think the best answer I can give is I've met so many people in my life, and I'm just like you, Bill, in many ways. I grew up as a child loving...
We all grew up as children, Eric.
Well, sometimes.
Okay, some of us. Some of us more than others.
Where I was going with that was
Sorry.
grabbing every book, every magazine, reading about Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, aliens. I love all of that. But that was so far removed, a lot of people just aren't open to believing. To me, a giant is very close to a human. Therefore, it is easier
Plausible.
to accept, plausible. And if I can get people to admit there are giants, well, then that kind of ushers the next step of what we do. And we talk about and hopefully have open minds. We ridicule and have some fun on the show. But that's all in good humor. But to present possibilities of the other things existing.
And I guess I come at it from the opposite perspective almost, in that since it's so plausible, it's not
It's boring.
as interesting a
It's
story
not as
because,
interesting.
well, it goes back to the earlier conversation. I mean, a person can be 8 foot tall. They're still a person. They're not a monster, you know?
Right.
And so for me, not that giant stories aren't fascinating. Obviously, the Giant of Kandahar is an awesome story.
That is a
that
great
I
one.
really, really like. But at the same time, it's not, I mean, if I'm
It's
flipping
not
through,
that big of a stretch.
if I'm flipping through and I got 3 articles and one of them's, you know, like, oh, well, they found the remains of a 8 foot tall person, and one of them is, you know, there's a new species of shark that's been discovered, and then one of them is, you know, livestock in Canada are being killed by some furry monster. I'm going to read the monster story because that's the most interesting. Not that new discoveries aren't fascinating and, you know, anomalous human beings are not interesting, but I just find it to be so mundane. As I do appreciate your thought that, like, well, this is close enough to acceptable that if I can get somebody to buy this, then maybe they'll buy into some of the other
Stepping
stuff.
stone, so to speak.
So I do like that take on it. I hadn't thought of it that way.
And I hadn't honestly thought about your take. So, I mean, I see that as well. But I mean, again, you and I, we've talked about stuff for decades. Stuff that most people would just totally scoff at. Sometimes after we talk about it, we scoff about it.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't know. It's interesting that two people are interested in the same type of things, but often we come from different directions.
Yeah.
Well, my question is, keeping it to the giant, what's the tallest human you personally have ever come in contact with? I'm not talking about TV or anything, but I mean face to face or face to chest, as the case may be.
You know him. You've worked with him. There were actually 2 guys that we used to work with. One was Eric Anderson.
Yep.
And Eric Anderson was just like, I'm eye to collarbone with Eric. He's a big guy.
Yep.
And like I said, I'm 6 foot tall. And when most rooms, when I walk in, I'm not the tallest, but I'm right there, you know, within most people. Anybody I have to look up to is almost intimidating in a way. And then there was a gentleman that worked in the tool room there. I don't remember his name right off the top of my head, but he was also really tall guy.
I think I do remember who you're talking about.
Now, the most intimidating tall person I've ever encountered.
Yeah.
There was a young lady I went to high school with that was probably 6.5 foot tall in high school.
All right.
And to be fair, that's tall for a woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not, outrageously so. I mean, there are plenty of tall women.
Intimidating.
But when you, as a man, and this will sound bad almost.
As a man.
But a woman that's taller than me is unexpected, to say the least. And
yes.
So I know, especially as a teenage boy, I found her to be incredibly intimidating.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, for me, I went to school here in Lebanon with a guy, and honestly, I want to say his name was David, but he moved away. He was only around for like a year or two, so I didn't get to know him that well. But we're going to, for all likely purposes, we're going to call him David. But I remember I had David in a couple classes, and he literally had to duck to get into the doorways of the school classrooms. This would have been about 1986, 1987, and I know those doors, the door jams would be like 7 foot at least.
My dad had a friend when I was in high school. He was a Waynesville City police officer. And when you talk about filling a door frame, shoulder to shoulder, he had to turn sideways and duck to walk in a regular door. Could you imagine him walking up to your car after being pulled over?
Yeah. Hello, officer. Oh, hello, officer. Yeah. Well, sopping wet, this guy might have weighed 180 pounds. I mean, he was very, very slender. He did not have reddish hair, but he had more brown, and it was naturally curly. Very nice, but obviously he didn't have a lot of friends. He was just intimidating. He was awkward. He was that guy. And I remember I had him in one of my art classes, and he actually sat across from me. He's a pretty cool guy. Now, I will take it a step further. While I can't say I met this person, my wife has very fond memories of a particular, I won't use the word giant because I don't want to offend Bill, but a tall person.
Yeah, but
no.
We've talked about your wife's height, and it could be a matter of perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. A whopping 5'2", bless her heart. Her grandfather on her dad's side was like 7'3", 7'5", depending on, he started to kind of shrink a little bit.
So it skips a couple generations.
Yeah, obviously I've joked about it. That's a sore spot. But my wife remembers very fond memories of him. He was very, very gentle. But has a picture of her dad, who was every bit as tall as me, 6'2", and he is standing directly under his dad's arm, which is outstretched.
Yeah.
And like where his armpit would be, basically, Brad, my father-in-law, her dad, was comfortably fit underneath her grandparents' or granddad's arm. And I love that picture yet today. I never, again, physically seen him, but she did. So I wanted to kind of throw that in as well. And obviously, yes, it does skip a few generations.
Hey, I'm not as tall as my dad, so.
I'm actually taller than my dad. Finally, I caught up with him. And
as he's going down, you're coming up.
Yeah, probably. No, I caught up with him probably by the time I was a senior in high school.
My dad's got me by like an inch. So, or at least last time I talked to him anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate each and every one of you, believers and non-believers, that stuck around with us through this episode.
And we hope our asides weren't offensive and, disrupted the flow of the podcast.
Definitely not intended, but sometimes this stuff just kind of flows out. But if you've enjoyed tonight's episode, give us a like, share, and don't forget to subscribe. And you can find Nightmares on the Lost Highway on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, and dozens of other platforms. We would appreciate your support in doing those few little small things. Those little likes and shares really get us noticed and get us out there a little bit more. And until next time, I'm Eric Tudor.
And I'm Bill Weirs.
And together we bring you Nightmares on the Lost Highway. Thanks for listening.
Hey, real quick, call to action. I think Eric would agree. We'd like to grow this Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Absolutely.
If you could, if you're listening on Apple, if you would go and give us a review and rate us. If you have some feedback, that's fine too. Whatever platform you're listening, follow us, rate us, give us some reviews. That helps get some recognition and gets our name out there.
We do have a Facebook page, Nightmares on the Lost Highway. You can easily find us if you want to communicate with us. If you want to share some possibilities for future podcasts with us, reach out. We want to talk with you guys.
I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.